Hi, everyone. So today, Lauren and I are going to be presenting on variation in the Scottish bit vowel or kit vowel, and stable variation and the formality of pandemic discourse. And our group of researchers is Lauren Hall-Lew, Jessica Bell, that's me, Nina Markle, Claire Cowie, Catherine Lai, Stephen McNulty, and Susanna Elliott from the University of Edinburgh. And in order to examine this variable, we conducted a real-time analysis. And ideally, a longitudinal comparison between two corpora would control for participant demographics and style as much as possible. However, today we're comparing two corpora that are slightly different in the sense that one consists of these very casual, traditional sociolinguistic interviews, and the other consists of self-recorded COVID-19 video diaries. And we find a perhaps unexpected stylistic contrast between the two. So canonically, examples of stable variation are more often consonantal than vocalic. For example, ing variation, TD deletion, or consonant cluster reduction. There are some examples of vocalic variation that's stable. For example, monophthongal versus diphthongal face and goat. And today we're going to be looking at the kit vowel or bit vowel and argue that it is possibly stable in Edinburgh English and Scots. So to give a little bit of history on the variable kit, the kit vowel is lower and backer in Central Belt Scots varieties and merged with strut. And something that makes this variable particularly interesting for us to look at is its social stratification in Scottish English, where middle class speakers have higher and fronter kits or kit vowels, and working class speakers have lower and backer kit vowels. And this pattern has been reported in Glasgow and in Edinburgh. Previous literature additionally suggests that we might be witnessing a change in progress towards non-standard varieties of kit, whereby middle-class men have a higher bit vowel than middle-class boys, so there's potentially this lowering in progress taking place, and middle-class and working-class men have a backer bit vowel than middle-class and working-class boys, so there's potentially this fronting in progress taking place. And this change in progress towards non-standard varieties of kit has been reported in Glasgow. Now to compare the two corpora that we used for analysis. So the first corpus, the Esling Corpus, consists of data collected in 1975 by Professor John Esling. And these are very casual sociolinguistic interviews. So John Esling is sitting with the speakers in the speakers' living rooms, for example. They're drinking tea, they're chatting, very, very casual. And in comparison, the Lothian corpus was collected in the present day, so 2020, 2021. And this corpus consists of these self-recorded COVID-19 video diaries. So speakers are by themselves talking to a camera, answering these prompt questions that were asked of them. And they're talking specifically about their experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic. For the Esling Corpus, a subset of 13 white Scottish men was picked for analysis. And for the Lothian Corpus, a subset of 8 white Scottish men was picked for analysis. And what's really noteworthy here is that our speakers' years of birth span nearly 100 years. So we have this great data set with this really broad range of speaker ages and years of birth to work with. For the Esling Corpus, tokens were hand annotated and vowel formants and durations were hand measured in Pratt. And for the Lothian Corpus, automatic phone alignment was used using the Montreal forced aligner, and the vowel formants and durations were automatically extracted on Pratt. A quick note on our operationalization of social class. So for both corpora, we coded social class as binary and ternary. And the ternary operationalization has these 3 groups: the established middle class, the new middle class, and the working class. And what's interesting here is that the new middle class consists of speakers who have been upwardly socially mobile. So speakers whose social class has changed throughout their life. For example, speakers born to working class parents but living middle class lives at the time of data collections. And also this included speakers who would be considered lower middle class. And we decided to present the results for the ternary coding for 2 reasons. Number 1, these reflect Esling's coding, as he also originally coded the speakers into one of 3 groups. And additionally, it allowed us to reflect a more nuanced reality of social class experience in Edinburgh and also be able to operationalize class as this potentially fluid experience. A quick note on our model structure and the envelope of variation. Tokens were only included if they had primary stress, had no following vowels, and didn't have any preceding liquids. And then the model factors that were included in the regression analysis are KIT duration, lexical frequency, preceding and following phonological place, speaker year of birth, speaker age, speaker social class, and the corpus. Moving on to the regression analysis, 2 regression analyses were done for the F1 and F2 of KIT. For this presentation, we're really only interested in the F1. And what's interesting for the non-significant factors for predicting F1, year of birth and age were not significant factors. And this is potentially interesting because we saw this change in progress in previous literature. So we might expect age to be significant, but it wasn't, neither for F1 nor for F2. And for F2, all external factors did not reach statistical significance, and lexical frequency also wasn't significant. The best fit model for F1 only retained log duration and an interaction effect between corpus and class. And for F2, the best fit model retained log duration and the preceding and following phonological environment. And we can see on the scatter plot on the right, we see for the duration in F1 that longer vowels are lower vowels. So we see this really characteristic centralizing effect of shorter token duration. In the box plot on the right, we can see that the Esling corpus has significantly lower overall vowel positions of KIT than the Lothian corpus. And when we look at the class effect, it doesn't seem to be a statistically significant main effect. However, when we look at the class effect within each corpus, the results become slightly more interesting. So we can see here that the established middle class speakers in both corpora pattern relatively similar. The slight difference that we're seeing here in their overall vowel height of KIT isn't statistically significant. So their overall position of KIT remains relatively similar in the 2 corpora. For the new middle class and working class speakers in the Esling corpus, they have significantly lower overall vowel positions of KIT than the established middle class. And for the Lothian corpus, the new middle class and working class speakers have significantly higher overall vowel positions of KIT than the established middle class. The differences we can see here between the new middle class and working class wasn't statistically significant, although we did think it was interesting that it's the new middle class speakers in the Lothian corpus that have the highest overall vowel position of KIT. And the class differences only reached statistical significance in the binary coding. So only the differences we can see here between the established middle class versus the new middle class and working class was statistically significant.
Okay, so now what to make of all of this? Our interim summary is that we can't really determine if there's sound change. There's definitely no quantitative evidence of sound change here. There's no significant interaction or main effect involving year of birth. But it's really just the fact that there are some major differences between these corpora that make a year of birth comparison pretty untenable. And one of them is the class differences between things called working class and style differences within members of the working class groups in particular. So we look at the class differences between the 2 corpora. We have these labels that are given relative to the other speakers in the corpora that make sense, but they also differ between the corpora. So if we compare both the new middle class and in particular the working class speakers of the 2 corpora, we see, for example, that Esling drew his speakers from the neighborhood in Edinburgh that has the highest rate of deprivation, according to the SIMD, the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. And our data was coming from all across the city, and in fact, all across the Lothian region. And so while we do have some speakers from that same neighborhood, we also have speakers from all over that have varying SIMD levels or different levels of deprivation. The jobs are really strikingly different. And of course, part of this is the comparison between the 1970s and now, but there still is also this tendency to see more manual labor jobs in the Esling data than in the Lothian data for the working class men. And then the age at which they left school is also different, right? So it's younger for the working class members of Esling's data than the Lothian data. So there's these class differences already, and that can maybe account for something, but there's still this unusual finding of the new middle class and working class speakers having an even higher KIT vowel than the established middle-class speakers in the Lothian data. And so this is probably best explained by stylistic differences between the corpora. So with the Esling data, you have this audience who is this one student. And in the Lothian diary corpus, we have a team of researchers representing the university. And because they're not speaking directly to that team, there's also an imagined audience that's hard to define and probably highly variable depending on the speaker. So it might be the general public, it might be individual members of the general public. They might be thinking they're speaking to the Scottish government, for example. It's quite wide-ranging, whereas John Esling was this single young American student sitting in their home. They're speaking directly to him, and he positioned himself as wanting to know about their life and their memories in Edinburgh. So the topics were things like childhood games and school memories and local memories, and it was all about his PhD, which was framed as a student project. They would often refer to it that way. And that's just so different from the oral history project that we framed the Lothian Diary project as being. So the topics are totally different. They're focusing on changes from COVID-19 on daily life and health and the challenges of that. And it was framed as a larger project that would kind of go down in the history books, like Come Make History was one of our recruitment calls. So the importance of it was quite different. Just so you get a sense of what it was like for the participants in the Lothian Diary project, here I put a screenshot of the website that gives advice on how to make the video diary. So some people refer to this, others completely ignored it. Some people took this quite literally by reading out the questions that we asked here and then answering them. You can just get a flavor since if you're watching this, you probably know what a sociolinguistic interview looks like, but the methodology of trying to prompt self-recording when you have no interaction at all face-to-face with the speaker is a bit unusual. So they went to this website here, and you can go and look at it for yourself. There's a lot of information on how to make the recording and all sorts of other things, but the actual advice on what to talk about is shown here. So now we're going to play you some clips of the working class white Scottish men who we analyzed in their production of Kit. You can see here quite a large stylistic difference. And this one begins with John Esling speaking, just so you get a frame of what he's asking about.
Just doing a thing on languages here in Edinburgh. And how about your wife?
Well, she can't speak Edinburgh, I mean. Languages.
Where's she from?
She's from Edinburgh.
Yeah.
No, she's from the Westmarket.
Okay, so compare that to the speaker.
How life has changed during lockdown? Well, missing friends, missing routine. It's been quite a big change. Boredom hasn't set in. A lot of time on your own, keeping yourself busy. A lot has changed.
So that's a pretty dramatic difference, but just for a sanity check, here's another comparison. These two speakers are born around the same time.
Yes, so I started work right away after school, yeah. No. Worked in the butchers. I've had a few jobs like worked in the butchers. And then I went to a warehouse, then to the brickwork, labouring.
I also go out entertaining pensioners, singing and playing, and I've missed that. And I hope that gets back quite soon. But I feel it's going to be a long time before we're back playing again, because I think the jury's still out on how long it's going to take for performers to get back performing again.
So there's probably a lot of things you noticed that differ between those speech samples. We notice overall, as just mentioned, that the speakers are pretty friendly and casual in Esling's interviews, especially, actually, I think, the working class speakers. And that's really different from the somber and serious style that we get from many of the COVID-19 audio-video diaries. Not all of them, but interestingly, the speakers in this subsample are really showing that style. In terms of read speech, there is read speech in both data collection methods, but it's kept entirely separate in the traditional sociolinguistic interview, of course, with the reading passage and word list coming at the end and not included in the data analysis. Whereas here, as I said, sometimes people will read those prompts from the website out loud and then respond to them. In the Esling corpus, most of the participants, if not all of them, are older than Esling was at the time. And he's also an American, and so they're positioned as expert in every way about local identity and about history, and he's just trying to learn from them. And here we have participants who are, of course, experts of their own experience, but it's a really different kind of expertise, right? It's not the same as speaking to like a young, keen outsider wanting to know more about the local area. So we see a new middle class and working class speakers probably had little motivation to converge towards Esling or towards some kind of more university or middle class standard, whereas in the Lothian diary corpus, they are pretty motivated to hypercorrect, really, to go beyond that middle class phonetic standard to put on their best voice for this oral history project. So in discussion, these self-recordings that we have, the whole corpus of 195 recordings shows a really wide array of stylistic variation. And a lot of it does speak to the previous finding that self-recorded speech is often more vernacular, more casual, more non-standard than interview speech can be. But in the case that we see here, there are many recordings that are quite clearly showing a much more formal style. And this might be unexpected for a self-recording, but it totally makes sense in terms of what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish. This is actually, interestingly, something that we noticed in my work with Zach Boyd in 2017, where we captured a similar style from a speaker who was talking to someone on Skype. So COVID-19 raises a really interesting context for the sociolinguistic idea of the danger of death question, right? So there seems to be probably a different style associated with talking about a single event crisis, the one we're more used to thinking about, versus this kind of prolonged, complicated, multifaceted, changing crisis like COVID-19. Maybe they elicit opposite styles. Oh, excuse me. So there's this question overall about whether the variation is stable or not, right? And it might be, it very well might be, that's what the data show, but it's a bit of an open question at this point because the data are so stylistically different. So in future, obviously, we'd want to try to interview these speakers, and that's one of our plans, and get more comparable data. Also to look at different kinds of speakers, people who are not white Scottish men, and other linguistic variables, and you'll have noticed some of those in the recordings that you heard. Ing, I think, is a particularly interesting one, and other stylistic variables. So these are video data, and so not longitudinally, but at least in terms of a synchronic study, we could really get into style and its physical presentation. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to our talk, and here are our references. Please feel free to get in touch.